want to say welcome to everyone who is here in the house. Thank you for attending the first of a series of 4 Black Minds Matter event hosted by the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State University. Your input is phenomenal. I want to go ahead and invite none other than Dr. Stacey Patton to come on in and join us as we overlap. At some point, I'm going to shift the conversation to just Dr. Patton and I. But so I want to thank the two of you right now and have the opportunity to introduce, you two to Dr. Patton, who's one of my colleagues up at Morgan State University. Stacey, these are two of my professors. They're partly responsible for the man that you see today.
Well, you both did a wonderful job. It's great to meet y'all. Nice to meet y'all and to hear the tail end of your comments.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Good to see you.
Congratulations on all of your just seminal work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great to share the stage with y'all. When I posted that this was happening on my Facebook page, people were like, "Oh my God," calling out both of your names and talking about the influence that you had on their educational experiences.
Oh, that's
thank you so much. And we're going to listen. I'm going to listen with rapt attention. I'm going to mute and listen.
I'm going to do the same thing.
And so y'all got me feeling like the scholarly DJ Khaled up in here bringing together giants, for masterpieces. No, I really appreciate the two of y'all. Thank you for joining us today. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and mute the two of you, and then if you can, just go ahead and turn off your videos so y'all can fade to the background. And then Dr. Patton, we're gonna go.
I actually love the visual effect. I need those social cues to see if what I'm saying is making sense. I like to see faces.
You saying I ain't good enough for you, sister?
I just gonna add to it.
Messing with you, so hey, you like it, I love it.
Yes.
Dr. Patton. All right. So for those who don't know, Dr. Stacey Patton is a professor at Morgan State University's Institute for Urban Research. She's a journalist extraordinaire. You've seen her on countless number of TV shows. You've read her articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post. I mean, she is heavy hitting. She's on the front line of dealing with corporal punishment as it relates to our children. She has a book called Spare the Child. Is that correct?
No, it's Spare the Kids. Spare the Kids Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America.
There it is. So it said it better than I ever could.
And then a forthcoming book called Strung Up, The Lynching of Black Children During Jim Crow.
Wow, that's right. And so Stacey Patton is on the front lines of this. And so what better person than to come in and assist us with this conversation about how violence and trauma impacts our mental health, and specifically, in part, as it exists in the media and social media realms. And so we had a brief conversation yesterday, Stacey, about how this whole thing is playing out, the promotion of corporal punishment through social media, people posting videos of them shaming children and literally showing kids being whooped and paddled in school, all kind of stuff. Stacey, give us a little bit of, give us a sneak peek into your perspective on all of this.
Well, it's always interesting a lot of times when we do have conversations about mental health, particularly in Black communities, people seem to skip over childhood as the foundational period where all of this gets established. It's as if, children give birth to themselves, that their socialization has nothing to do with their emotional, spiritual, cognitive development. And then we see these adults and there's like all this mystery as to how they got this way in terms of, their thinking, their self-concept, how they relate to other people. And, I'm always wanting to say, well, what kind of childhood did you have? What happened to you? How were you raised? How were you spoken to? How was your body treated? So I always begin everything from a scholarly perspective from this foundational period, childhood. If as a historian, when I've gone back into the past, the first question I ask is, where are the children? And so I really got interested in focusing on childhood from a journalistic perspective, from a historical perspective, based on my own childhood experiences growing up in an abusive family. And listening to the ways, particularly the African Americans talk about their children. And then listening to the adults who look back on their childhood and celebrate some of the most toxic aspects of their upbringing and crediting that, particularly being whipped as a child, with their success. I'm a successful person, and meaning that usually means I'm not a serial killer. I didn't go to jail. I have a job. I may have gotten a degree, right? But then I'm like, how's your emotional health? And they don't seem to realize that that statement that they make, I was whipped as a child and I turned out fine, is actually evidence that you didn't turn out fine, because your brain, while it was developing, learned to invert violence as something that was good. So the messages of love and pain, merged, fused together, and that prefrontal cortex area of your brain became a biological experience. And now you're this adult who learned to normalize pain and violence, and are continuing, more than likely, those cycles of violence with your own kids. And so when I started working on Spare the Kids, I started gathering all of these videos, some of them on Facebook, Instagram, now TikTok. TikTok is a more recent invention, but sites like World Star Hip Hop, YouTube, this whole genres of these videos. And it's primarily African Americans who pick up cell phones and record themselves shaming their kids or whipping them. And when you think about that entire process, so one of the things I teach is digital journalism. So to do this, a parent needs a cell phone and they need to set the stage. I mean, really think about the psychology behind all of that. So I'm gonna pick up this device. I'm gonna make sure you stay in my frame, depending on the size of my cell phone, right? And so, or they have another child who is filming the interaction. So you have a sibling who's watching this violence, right? And being asked to record and
participating, right?
Yep, and which is doing something to their sense of empathy. So a lot of times I hear Black women especially say, Black men don't show up for us. They don't protect us in public when we're under assault. So my first question is, when he was a little boy, right, was he asked to hold a camera, asked to witness violence being meted out against his sister? Right? Did we teach him that first? Right.
Or was he a victim of the violence himself?
Exactly. Right.
At the hands of a woman. Yeah.
Exactly. So you got this camera, you're making sure you and your child are in the frame. Okay. Then there's the talking to. So the parent is justifying their actions. Right. So the kid is having this fight or flight response going on in their body. Heart rate is up. The eyes dilating, the ears are, firing information to the brain, their stomach is churning. There's all this stuff happening, that preparation, which is awful, which is a form of toxic stress. And so we don't see that when we're watching. Well, if you're a psychologist, you see it because you're trained to read bodies. But so this is happening, the parent is talking, and then there's this crescendo, which leads up to the whooping. And so you see that violence, you hear it, as a survivor, it's very disturbing to me to hear all of that again. And so the whooping is done. It's now recorded. You press stop. It doesn't stop there. So now you got to go to your computer, or you do it right here. You got to set up a YouTube account, right? So that takes a few minutes to do that. Then you got to upload the video to your YouTube account. Put a headline on, a nice little title, a little description. My son got his ass whooped today because he
make sure
or my daughter was being fast, so I had to whip her, right? And so you got that, and now it's live. It's on this platform. Now you got to market it. So you go to usually your Facebook page, to your audience, and this is what I had to do to my kid. More kids need this. Boom. Now it's on your Facebook page, Instagram, whatever. And now this audience of people, these strangers, get to witness the violence that you meted out onto your child. And then they start this whole testimonial thing. Everybody's testifying. I got switches. This is what these kids today need. Like, so there's all of it's like public therapy. And it's really interesting to watch what people say. And so you've got this child whose parents have betrayed them in the social space and made it possible for all these people to witness this very shameful, intimate act that went down in the house, and it's out there living forever. So imagine 5 years from now, maybe you did this when this child was 7. Now they're 15, they're 21 in college, and this thing is still out there that your parent did to you. And think about the psychological, and in Facebook, So I went 2 years ago to Facebook with a bunch of Black women, journalists and activists.
You mean literally to the headquarters?
The headquarters.
Okay.
We were invited to talk about their community standards and how they could change it. So I sat at that table and I said, I am deeply concerned that Black activists, journalists, writers can be put in Facebook jail for telling the truth about race. I just got out of jail last week, by the way.
Right.
But yet y'all allow these videos of these Black children having their eyebrows shaved off, hair shaved off, being yelled at, being whipped, by their parents to go viral.
Right.
And you say you're about protecting the welfare of children, their psychological well-being and such, but we allow all of these viral videos to continue to circulate. And what message does that send to other Black children who see this? What message does this send to a larger human church about how we value our own children? And what role does this viral content play in normalizing and perpetuating an ecosystem of abuse against Black children?
Right. What permission does that give outsiders to do to our children?
Absolutely. So I think I've been pushing to try to get the state legislatures to develop bills. So we have bills in some places against bullying, online. This should qualify as such. These children don't have the right to consent. I mean, just the right to say to people, to adults, don't put your hands on me in the first place.
Let alone don't video me and then upload it.
Exactly.
Dr. Harrell, you had something you wanted to jump in?
No, it told me that you did.
Okay, I thought I saw you do. I thought I saw your hand jump up. I thought you wanted to get in.
The little screen said that you were pushing something, so I said, I don't know what it's doing. So
all right, my bad. I thought I saw you wanted to chime in on something. My apologies for that. Wow, Stacey, it was something you're saying a lot here. You're putting a lot out here on the table for us to deal with and to digest and to seek to understand. What you've set up was a premeditated state of violence. When you're talking about the cameras and the positioning and the angles, it's almost like we're being led blindly into a new culture, and I don't think that we truly understand the depth of the impact and how far reaching this new culture of recorded violence against children, what it's going to do to us. So what are some of the everyday behaviors that you see that are a result of this type of televising or socializing of violence?
Well, I can say one thing I've been curious about is the kids who have appeared in these viral videos. I've not seen, when these stories get picked up journalistically, it's usually this parent was arrested as a result of posting this viral video of them abusing their kids. And most times the parents are not charged. So there's usually outrage or people who report it. And there's sometimes these videos have millions of views and most of the comments are positive. Wow. This is what we need to do. We have the day-to-day means that, we've got people scapegoating our children for these broader sociological problems. So it's, if you see a father who's beating his daughter in the middle of the street with an extension cord, which is one viral video I've seen, people aren't saying, oh my God, this is a grown man doing this to his teenage daughter. Right. What is that going to send to her in terms of her relationships, future relationships with the men? Right. So my dad, who loved me, who says he wanted to protect me, was the first to put his hands on me, to prime me for these types of toxic relationships. What's the impact of that, right? And so what happens is it allows within our culture to keep blaming Black children for all of these social issues, right? It's not divestment in public schools. It's not police brutality. It's not eco hazards. It's not the dead food that they're eating. It's not all of these other issues. It's these kids. And so Black children are the true enemy of peace. And so by posting these videos on social media, the parents are looking for validation to say, look at what a good parent I am. And if only we had more Black parents who would pick up razors and shaved eyebrows and heads and, pick up belts and stuff, to chastise these kids, then our communities would look better.
Wow.
It's
And so
as
that,
if they think that this is beating children and terrorizing them and shaming on social media is an effective civil rights strategy.
right. And then that validation piece is real. And I say that oftentimes when somebody has been themselves physically abused or sexually abused, and oftentimes they're trying to normalize that trauma and make sure that they're not the only one that has experienced that. And the surefire way to make sure that they're not the only one is to do it to somebody else. So at least they know that they've also had sexual abuse trauma, or they know they've also been physically, emotionally, or psychologically or verbally abused. Dr. Hill, you got something, Doc?
Okay. First, let me just say, I cannot tell you, Dr. Patton, how grateful I am that you have taken up this cause and have put this book out, really, truly, because it has such long-standing implications for me. I used to do a lot of parent training. I would say the same thing, very similar in terms of the impact of spanking. I got the same responses. And during that time, I heard someone say once, well, this all comes down from what may have been a protective process during slavery. I just want to get your feedback on this, where if a child was being torn away, or if a child had done something, that kind of, disrupted, the horrors of, minding your master or, whatever, a parent may have said, don't beat him. I can beat him. And I know you've heard this story before, and I just wonder what your thoughts about it were, so the mother then beats the child, maybe within inches of one's life in certain cases, to keep that child alive and from literally getting killed if the overseer was charged with the beating.
Wow.
Or, sent away or sold away. Because I've heard parents, bring that up, and I just wonder what your thinking about that was.
So I address that in Spare the Kids. And when people say that, you have to offer them empathy, right? Because living in this spiritually dead white supremacist nightmare, infects everything. It infects parent-child relationships between Black men and women, everything, our spiritual cosmos, all this. And so people, reach for things to try to stay safe, try to have some sense of control, right? And so the thinking was, I've read a lot of oral history narratives from slavery and Jim Crow, and that's a theme that keeps coming up, that these parents love their children. And during slavery, Black parents tried as best they could to attach emotional meaning to their lives when these white folks just had economic value for our children's lives. And so the thinking was, look, if I break you, if I beat you, at the end of the day, at least you're going to be alive. Versus if the master does it or overseer does it, there's no love attached to that whip. There's no during Jim Crow, it became especially dangerous to be a Black child because Black children represented, a future threat unlike any others before, right? Because they had the potential to upturn the entire system. So now you could kill them. And so at the end of the day, if I beat you versus this white person, you might not end up alive. But what I have to tell people is that what slavery really did was create a kind of elusive Black parenting, giving them the illusion of control over their children's lives and destiny. But what it actually did was it gave the only real power that the enslavement process gave to Black parents was the ability to distort and break them and have their children and have them conform to this system. Now, I continue to hear these echoes in our current situation where I hear parents say, well, if I don't whoop you, then the police might do it, the police will arrest you. My adoptive mother started telling me this when I was like 6 years old. She would say, I whoop you because I love you, because I don't want you to end up in jail. The white man may kill you. The white man doesn't want you to have this and that. And I would be so confused. I'm like, who is this white man that she keeps talking about? Is it Ronald Reagan? Was it Bob Barker from The Price is Right?
Which one of them? Which one of them is it?
Which white man? And the reality was, it's such a, in retrospect, I'm like, wait a minute. So because America is racist, you have to beat Black children to protect them from, to make them fear that authority, to fear that racist, but also you who's supposed to be protecting them.
It was the white
Jeff,
man in her head.
It's the white. Now, Jeff, can I share my screen? I just want to show a quick data point.
Yes.
So when,
got you, sis.
okay, here we go. So I hear parents say, if I don't whoop my child, the police will kill them, right? And so what I did was I tested this out. So during the Black Lives Matter movement, there were a number of journalistic outlets that started gathering data on police shootings. And so one of the most popular ones is Fatal Force from the Washington Post. And so what I did was it allows you to disaggregate the victims by age and by race. So I extracted out all the Black child victims killed by cops. And then I also went to the annual child maltreatment reports, which are put out every single year. And I extracted all the Black children killed by their parents during those same time periods. So the sentence goes like this: between 2013 and 2018, a total of 41 Black children were killed by police officers. During that same time period, a total of 2,389 Black children were killed by their own parents and caretakers. Now, both of these are horrible. And I don't say this in a Fox News Black on Black crime sort of way, but Black children are more at risk of being seriously assaulted or killed by their own parents than the police. And so
people try to mute that conversation. People try to mute that all the time. They say, well, what about Black on Black crime? They do it as if you would be cooning almost to have this conversation, but the numbers speak for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. They absolutely do. And we have a problem. We can be outraged by the headlines when it's a cop who kills a Black child, but there's a more sinister, right? Silent, hidden Holocaust happening in our own communities that we need to talk about. And these are, and we know based on the data that it's only a fraction of child abuse that gets reported every year.
That's
right. I said on my Facebook page a few weeks ago, when we were talking about Ma'Khia Bryant's death, I said, well, because people were arguing with me saying that the fact that she was in foster care had nothing to do with her death. And I said, I disagree. And I said, quite frankly, a lot of y'all qualify for foster care if we want to be real truthful about it.
They just didn't get taken away.
Yeah. And we just don't like to admit that we were traumatized, right? That you can still love your parents and honor your parents, but also be honest about, well, they didn't know that hitting your child, even when you don't leave marks, alters the brain, right? Causes toxic stress and inflammation in the body, right? We don't have those conversations because we're socialized, to agree with masses logic that in order to make Black people civilized, law-abiding, good, successful people, that we have to process our bodies through violence and pain.
Right. Talk a little bit more about Sister Ma'Khia and that whole situation, because she was being under attack by adults in the moment, adult with weapons, actually, right?
Yep, absolutely. So when this first came out, and it was sort of passing mention, oh, she was in foster care. And I immediately said, oh my God, because I was in foster care, right? I grew up until I got lucky enough and got a scholarship to boarding school. I was in and out of foster care system. And when I heard that, I said, she was protecting herself. She was probably danger mapping, because you're in strange settings with people who don't love you, your paycheck. I'm not saying that there aren't foster homes out there that are good and loving, but I instantly recognized, her situation.
Danger mapping, real quick. Danger mapping, assessing the dangers in your environment.
Yep. So you're hypervigilant, you're in an unfamiliar place, right? You experience daily microaggressions of being an outsider in somebody else's home, family. It could be a group home, youth shelter, You're with other traumatized kids who have their own anger issues, so they could be a threat to you. Somebody could be sexually abusing you. You feel unheard, frustrated, and so you're basically on your own. You've got to navigate this all on your own, and so you have to be ready, right?
Right.
Particularly, and let's be real, you're in foster care because of neglect or abuse.
Right.
That's simple, right? And so you're already coming into the situation with all this stuff that you were born with, whatever was happening to your mama while you were in the embryonic stage, right? Those first few years, 0 to 3, we don't know what was going on.
Right.
And then all of these traumas that are accumulating in the body. So now she's 15 years old. She's angry, she's grieving, she's disconnected from her family, her community, right? Even if her parents were abusive, a lot of abused kids still want to go back because there's trauma bonding that happens between the parent and child, right?
It's home. Yeah.
Yep, it's home. And then here she is. And, for me as a Black girl child, I resented being in foster care. I resented that the rest of my adoptive relatives didn't bother to step up to take me into their home, that I had to navigate this system with these strange white people, right? In these unfamiliar spaces where I could be yanked out at any time. I had to try to balance that with school and the shame that I felt from being adopted. I felt shame from walking around with scars on my face and being a foster kid. And so all of this frustration is in your body. And the foster care system is not designed to be therapeutic. It does not follow a therapeutic model.
Even if you have a therapist.
Even if you had, all mine looked like Sigmund Freud, and I would just sit there looking like,
right,
we don't have anything to talk about. And so they don't tell you how to get in control of your body, right? How to discharge anger and frustration and stress in healthy ways. If anything, they try to pump you up with some psychotropic medications that are not approved for kids with developing brains, right? They have all of these side effects, puts them at risk for depression, cutting, suicide, aggressive behavior, right? So there's all of that stuff that's happening. And so the foster care system is fast becoming a pipeline to prison. Absolutely. As well, right? Yeah. And so she was dealing with all of that. And when you go back, I read the New York Times piece, and I wrote a piece for the Griot way before this. It's interesting as a Black woman, when you say these things, nobody believes you. But it takes the New York Times to write something. It's like, but I got
Stacey was right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. They were yelling at me, all that, because I was like, this child was not troubled. Right. She was not a deviant. She did not deserve to be shot in the street like a dog. Right. And so then we get all this information that, she was being shuttled between foster homes, her and her sister. Right. She was an honor roll student. She was loving. She was caring despite her traumas.
Overcoming the odds. Right.
All that. And her grandmother, God bless her grandmother, who tried as best she could, to protect her. And she's in a house where another foster child who was 20 something years old is allowed access back into the space to threaten, to bully, to pick up a knife. After they've aged out. And she picked up a knife to threaten and spit at this girl and her grandmother.
Wow.
So they call the cops. It takes the cops 12 minutes to get there. 12 minutes. Now, if you're under attack, that's an eternity.
That's a long time.
And so she does what she can do to try to protect herself. And at the end of the day, she's the one that's dead. And then we got all these people, calling her troubled, looking at her size, right? To say, oh, she should have known better. And so it was such a troubling conversation. And it's part of that viral ecosystem of conversation about Black children's bodies, behaviors, their psychology that just gets looked at through such a distorted lens.
And see, I did all of my clinical training in foster care, in the foster care system. I did the parenting. I literally developed the training course for parents who are interested in becoming foster parents, as well as those continuing on with their CEUs to maintain their certification and licensure. I did direct therapeutic services with them. I did clinical assessments with children who were in foster care system. Heck, I even worked with the biological and the adoptive and foster parents, families. And one thing that I constantly realized, and when I'm looking at these diagnoses, there were ADHD, oppositional defiant disorders, major depressive disorders, all of these different labels with the accompanying psychotropic medications being prescribed, as you're saying. And what I realized after my first couple of assessments, I said, no. ADHD ain't it. Oppositional defiant disorder, that ain't it. These are adjustment disorders if they're anything. And the adjustment disorder is that when they take longer than expected to adapt to a new situation. But I understood that the adaptation couldn't take place because it was an ongoing situation. They never returned home. Many of the kids, like you said, wanted to go back home. No matter what was happening at home, that's home base. They wanted to reset. Not only that, like you said, they're being moved from one place to another
They're
to
refugees.
another. And every place, they're living out of a bag. They're storing
garbage
food under their
bags.
pillows, and literally garbage bags. They're storing food under their pillows, under their beds, wherever they could, because they don't know when the next meal is coming. And all of this uncertainty and insecurity, I'm like, no, they're in an adjustment period. And so if they pop off in school because a teacher disrespected them, that's normal for their situation and circumstance. And it got to a point to where I literally had a psychiatrist ready to fight me because I was continually successfully overturning their ADHD and other major depressive diagnoses.
Because you messing with his money.
I was messing with all kind of the money, the ego, the pride, even sometimes the sadistic nature sometimes, right? And so, and Stacey, I had one young brother, he was the first one to come to me and said, Mr. Jeff, this is while I was doing my training. Mr. Jeff, I don't like this medicine. It makes me feel like a zombie. And I said, well, here you go, young brother. You realize that you only have to take it during the school year, right? He said, yeah. I said, you know why that is? He said, so they could control me in school. I said, A++. I said, so here we go. We're going to use this summer to get you off. I'm going to teach you some behavior modification techniques that you can apply to yourself. And I could buy you 1 month at the beginning of the school year before they put you back on the medicines to show that you don't need them anymore. I said, you down? He said, absolutely. Stace, he was the first of about 6 kids that I was able to walk down the path of getting off the medicine after overturning their diagnosis, because I taught them self-love, self-respect. Dr. Harrell and Dr. Hill, y'all remember my dissertation was about culturally specific rites of passage and infusing cultural knowledge, self-esteem, self-love, healthy self-concept in the kids that would then keep them from having risky sexual abuse or sexual behaviors, as well as risky substance abuse behaviors. So with all of that being said, Stace, I'm just saying, sister, I side with you, and I've already been tipping my hat to you, but the story that you're sharing and to see who I'm sitting across from and oftentimes next to right now, it shows that our children are not the problem. It's the situation, the circumstance, and I can't help but to understand that it's being purposely made worse, because you see babies as young as 2 years old in strollers with one of these things in front of them, watching Lord knows who what. And so they're being socialized and prepped to be the next video recorder.
You are so right. Again, when I teach, digital media and media literacy to students, and I started noticing this a few years ago when I was teaching at Morgan. My incoming freshmen were so fidgety. They couldn't sit still. They had the attention span of a gnat. Wow. And, they had cognitive deficits. Like I would say, like a memory issue. So I would say, your homework for this weekend is X, Y, Z. 30 seconds later, Dr. P, what's our homework? And I was teaching around a lot of boomers. So the boomer faculty would be like, these kids, they procrastinate, they don't pay attention, they're lazy, all that. And I was sitting at the table because I was the youngest faculty member in the School of Global Journalism. And I'd say, no, there's something else going on. It's digital addiction. It's changing the physical architecture of their brain. And so I started going in and reading the neurobiological literature and reading books like Pornified, reading books on just basically on digital addiction. And I was like, oh my God. And then when I saw The Social Dilemma on Netflix, it all came together for me. And I said, this is on purpose. So we know the demographic shifts are happening in this country, right? The future of this country is Black and brown. It ain't white, right? And so what better way to undermine the future potential and possibility of this new demographic than to stress them out. So expose them to their bodies to toxic stress very early on, their parents to toxic stress, their communities so they can't grow and thrive and breathe correctly, echo hazards, all of these traps, right? Environmental traps. And then add to it this, when you have these people at Facebook and all of these other places who were these software engineers who consulted with psychologists, right? To understand dopamine,
Right.
how to set off people's reward centers, right? And you consult with them to get them hooked and addicted to this,
Right.
while their brains are developing between age 0 and 24, 25. They keep changing the adding
Right.
a year every so often. While this is all happening, on top of all these other layers of generational trauma and environmental issues that are impacting the way they develop and grow. But this right here, and I tell this to my students, I'm like, I'll ask them questions like, how many of y'all like to read? Journalism students, mind you. And maybe a few students raise their hands. I'm like, no judgment here. Tell me why you don't like to read. So they'll say, well, Dr. P, it's just boring. Or I fall asleep. And I'm like, okay, that's not laziness. That's the impact of this firing off. So I literally take out a model of a brain and I show what's happening on the two hemispheres. I talk about synapses and all of this other stuff. And I'm not a neuroscientist here, but I'm explaining all of this to them and how your brain gets exhausted. It's like being on heroin. You're getting these hits in your reward center, right? So you're spending all this time on video games. You get these little red alerts that make you excited, like, oh, I gotta check my phone. Oh, all these alerts here, right? It's just firing off, right? And then you're like, all right, I gotta put this down and go read a 25-page article for class that Dr. P assigned. So here I am, I'm the second paragraph in, and I'm already wanting to fall asleep because your brain has been exhausted and you're not getting that same reward, stimulation. And this is what's happening. And so I tell them this, and I'm like, and when you're glued like this, what is this doing to your ability to read social cues? Well, how you're becoming sort of, developing this non-verbal disabled context in which you're moving in the world. You can't read body language, facial expressions, vocal reactions. All of this stuff is rendered invisible when you're just primarily communicating through a screen. So all this digital addiction becomes this barrier to clear communication. They don't know how to take healthy risks. And that's really bad when you're training journalism students. They don't know how to ask questions. They don't have confidence in their social lives. They have a hard time maintaining friendships. They don't know how to date in healthy ways. They don't know how to be honest about their true feelings. Developing active listening and taking in information. They don't know how to deal with conflict resolution and disagreements with people. We see this on social media with folks who are much older. Like they just get triggered by everything. They're reading words through distorted lens. When they're exposed to violent material on social media or these digital devices, it increases their risk for aggression. And that doesn't always mean, they're going to become, mass shooters, but just in their own workspaces and interpersonal relationships, they can't distinguish between reality and fantasy. They're always afraid. They think they become very hyper vigilant. So if I bump into you on the street, it wasn't an accident. You meant to bump into me, right?
That's exactly where I was about to go, Doc. When you look at like the short fuses that people have nowadays, what I think is being exacerbated by, the situation like gas shortage and toilet paper shortage and all this stuff that's happening. And now people don't have grace anymore. It's like the benefit of doubt that we used to have for our fellow human beings has been eroded to the point to where it's non-existent. And so, and when you're constantly experiencing and viewing and being, doped up by this social media based violence, recorded videos, I think people actually want to see it in person now and want to be the one that's able to whip out the camera real quick, start recording their particular recording, be the one that goes viral, even if what they're recording is a death or the serious injury of another human being. I think that, going back to what you were saying about the future demographics, when I look at this nation being Black and brown down the road, I thought, like, it crossed my mind. Every now and then I get these, I don't like to call them cynical. I like to call them reality-based flashes of insight that I hope don't come true. But I had this flash that,
I need to steal that line from you.
You got it, sis. Anything I put out there is yours, sis. It's like, I was like, oh God, this is going to be a penal colony, just like Australia was, meaning that these borders will be locked down with its majority Black and brown population, and it would be so desolate. But at the same time, it'd be used to produce resources and goods, whatever those resources. It might be, we might all be prison labor one day. This whole nation might end up being a plantation again. But I had that flash and said, because it's something about that future projection of population, and we sell it. Some people, they celebrate, yeah, it's going to be Black and brown in a few years. And it's like, yeah, it's going to be Black and brown in a few years. Where they going?
It's going to be Black and brown, intellectually disabled, spiritually dead, desolate. Right? And like I tell my students, if you're like this all the time, what are you missing? What are you not? What changes aren't you seeing? What relationships aren't you having? Yeah. What injustice are you not fighting? Right? This is a perfect way to disable future folks, and I've seen it in my classrooms. It's to the point where I say my ability to teach students how to write coherent sentences is a political act.
It's been hindered.
And then it's also like,
thumb typing.
Yeah. And it's like, it's gotten to a point where as a professor, when you say, I have high standards for my students, I want them to be the very best. If I tell my students, anybody who accepts your mediocrity as brilliance is your enemy, then somehow that gets interpreted as me being ableist. To say, show up on time, be your best, right? Don't give me half-ass work. Right. It's like, it's just this culture of just like apathy and just, and so I see it seeping into the classroom and I'm like, oh my God, it's working. It's sickly brilliant the way they've done this. And when you're able to connect the dots, when you see the whole ecosystem, right, starting from what happens when our kids are infants.
Right. Or in the womb.
The exposure to, the digital addiction. Like my students, I did this survey because I said, how many of y'all don't have your driver's license yet? And now if you can remember, maybe even I'm an 80s, 90s kid, at least by 16, everybody was like, yeah, got my, learner's permit, whatever, I'm driving.
Right.
This generation of millennials, Gen Zs and Gen Cs, decreasing numbers of kids with their driver's license. And then I actually showed them a study from this. And I said, well, what's going on? And the kids they hadn't really paid attention to it. They were like, oh my God, I don't have my driver's license. And these are 18 to 24-year-olds. And it's because one student said, it's because we're afraid.
Wow.
Everything we see, you might get into an accident if you text and drive. Right. Or, this might happen to you. So there's this fear when you've spent a childhood in isolation with this is your love, right? Even the number of young people not engaging in sex, right? Or healthy sex, right? Everything they see is through porn. They have that easy access there. It's impacting, their ability to, engage with people in very intimate ways. And they were totally blown away by this because of this here.
Wow. I wish people had a better understanding of psychology. I tell my students all the time, I say, look, y'all, if you're not a psych major, at least minor or pick it up as a double major, because this is going to help you to know better about you and other people. You might not always be thinking, but you're always using your mind. Your psychology is always at play.
Yep.
We're
and
rounding up.
And let me say one more thing.
Yeah.
Black people need to reorient their relationships with social media. Mm-hmm. We are one of the primary groups that use like Twitter and Instagram primarily, right? But we have to be aware of what it's doing to our own psychology, right? The constant exposure to police violence, violence against Black bodies. Like, I became real sensitive to this as I started working on this book about child lynchings. Mm-hmm. And people would just send me stuff in my inbox all the time. It's a lynching or it's a child being beaten. And I'm like, please stop sending me this material. I just don't, because what then happens is we become numb to it, right? Yeah. It just becomes so normalized. And then we're putting out more, unconsciously putting out more of this stuff, in this space. And also social media tends to be a trap where, and Clubhouse is the new thing. It's invitation only, but it's all audio. And so
exclusive.
Yeah, you get all these traumatized people who set up these rooms where they talk about depression and suicide. And there's not a therapist in the space to help people process what they're hearing, what's being discussed, how to cope, right? And so I just believe social media could be wonderful. You can have connections with folks, but it is also another intentionally toxic space where we rant, we argue, we fight. It's not about understanding anything. It's not about galvanizing. And what people don't realize is that they're addicted to the app. They're not forming real, authentic, real-time relationships with people. It's an app, and it creates these illusion of connection, right, to folks. And it's even more exacerbated in the isolation of a pandemic. So we as a collective need to figure out, while we're being surveilled and tracked and monitored and data extracted from us, what it's doing to wear on our psychology and our soul as a community, and not galvanizing us to get out in the streets, get out into the halls of power to actually change policies.
Right. Y'all check out that Disney movie WALL-E, and you will see that what they project human beings to be, obese, chair-ridden consumers. Dr. Harrell, do you have any last words you want to leave with our peoples?
I just want to thank Dr. Patton for all of those words. I was thinking of the Ava DuVernay, one of her early films was called Middle of Nowhere. And there's an interesting dialogue in this between a mother and her daughter. The granddaughter's in the room, and the mother says something to the effect that, if I'd said that, you'd have smacked me. And the grandmother says, yeah, well, I've learned some things over time. It was the first time I really heard people pushing back on this violence against our children. It's a beautiful movie to watch. But thank you so much, Dr. Patton, for that. Was wonderful.
Thank you so much, sir.
Right on. Well, Dr. Harrell, love you, brother, and thank you for participating today.
Thank you, man.
Dr. Hill, I know you're still with us, so thank you so much, Dr. Hill. I love you and appreciate you for participating today as well. My sister, Stacey Patton, Dr. Stacey Patton, I love you and appreciate you participating today, sis. Honored for all of you all and the work that you do and what you contribute on a daily basis, because y'all aren't just scholars, you are activists as well. And I really, really value that. We need more of it.